All right, well, thank you. Good morning. Welcome to MD Expo in Baltimore. Want to thank you guys for coming out and seeing me and learning a little bit today. So we'll try and keep it lively and not too dry and boring. So we're here for Anesthesia 101. And presented by me, Brian Wilson. A little background. So I was first trained on anesthesia back in 1997. At that time, I worked for Abbott Laboratories, and we had just rolled out sevoflurane. If any of you are already familiar with anesthesia or worked around it. So the sevoflurane had been originally developed in the 1950s. However, it had a nasty habit of creating acidosis in the patient's lungs. So that kind of took it off the market. So in the 1990s, Abbott's Japan division had perfected the ability to take the sevoflurane and make it so it didn't create acidosis inside of the lungs. And so I was part of the initial rollout group that got sevoflurane back on the market. So that's kind of my background as far as where I got my start in anesthesia. I wanted to make a little tribute. This is Danny Valenzuela. He was a coworker and a dear friend, and he sadly passed away last year. So Danny was our primary OR guy and anesthesia guy at Rose Medical Center in Denver. And I was his backup because no one else in the shop knew how to work on anesthesia. So me and Danny worked together. We would, you know, like go tackle problems together, or if he got behind on his PMs, we would, you know, like tag team him and get him knocked out. Danny was also a local radio personality, and here he's at a concert in the studio. I was a Santana cover band, and Claire and I had gone to it, and great guy. He'll be missed, but anytime that him and I worked together, we'd always pick one of the back OR rooms, and he always had the best music, so you know we could jam out to some tunes, and yeah, great guy. So like I said, he'll be missed. Okay, so kind of a scope of the course. We're just going to kind of cover the, you know, highlights and overview of anesthesia. I really want to highly emphasize this, that you should only really work on these machines if you're properly trained, or if you have someone working with you that is trained. Anesthesia can be extremely dangerous to both the technician, the staff, and the patient. I have in my travels over the years actually I've known two people that have actually passed away working on anesthesia through unfortunate accidents. So it is the real deal. So you do want to treat it as probably I would say probably the most dangerous of any of the life support equipment that you can work on. Why anesthesia? Well, I'll have to say this, for all my years that I've been working in the industry, anesthesia is actually my favorite modality. I can stand here and actually say I've worked on everything from a thermometer all the way up to an MRI. But if I had my choice, if I could go back to what I really like to do and make the same kind of money that I'm making as an imaging guy, I'd do anesthesia in a heartbeat, despite some of the issues. One reason I like it is it's a challenging modality. There's a lot of moving parts to it, and it can be complicated. I think probably the most complicated part is double checking yourself, or as I like to do, triple check everything that I do to a machine just based on the what it's doing and how dangerous it can be. One nice thing about anesthesia is typically, I mean, unless you have to go into the room during a case where you got a patient on the table, it's really chilled. You can find yourself a back OR area or take it down to the shop, and it's quiet, typically relaxing. For the most part, at least in the facilities that I've been in, the anesthesia's taken care of pretty well. I mean, you can go in the OR and they're throwing stuff around and, you know, things are getting broken, but most of the time the anesthesia carts are fairly safe and secure, so you don't have to deal with a bunch of damage or abuse. I won't go back in the history of anesthesia itself, I mean, very far, because, I mean, it goes clear back into the, well, early 19th century when they started using it for like surgery like we would know. But, you know, pretty much you can look back into the 1960s when you would start seeing what we would consider an anesthesia machine. And that development kind of went into the 1980s. The current technology you can trace back to probably like the late 1990s, early 2000s. Today's machines are a lot more integrated and digital than their predecessors. And then there were also advances in the anesthesia gas, mainly with desflurane and SIVO. So here's I guess if you want to call it, more modern machine. This is from 1972. This is a Narcomed standard. It's pretty stripped down. It would have had a lot more stuff going on it. You would have only had one vaporizer on this and no ventilator. It would have been patient would have been manually bagged by the anesthesiologist. But so, you know, 50 plus years ago, this is what would have been the state of the art. Jump a decade, and this is Narcomed 2A made by Draeger. And now you're getting into what you would consider probably an anesthesia machine by our standards. It was very mechanical. It was very analog. Really no digital electronics per se. There was a little, but all in all, the machine was fairly straightforward. This would have been the vintage of machine that I would have started working on when I got into the business. Just to point out some of the highlights here. Here's your vaporizers. We still use isoflurane, and looks like we got a little SIVO going there, but oops, that fingered that. So halothane is I don't give much room with that button. So halothane was what basically SIVO and DES replaced. Halothane was a horrible agent. It was hard on patients as well as it was hard to work around. So I was really glad to see halothane go away. But overall, I mean, if you were to, you know, go back in the day and see one of these, you wouldn't be too surprised on the difference of technology than what we currently call anesthesia. So a little different kind of explanation, and again, this is kind of a, I don't know, Reader's Digest version of sedation. So we have two levels of sedation. You have conscious sedation, and you'll find conscious sedation used in like the cath lab, IR, GI lab, and for like minor surgical procedures like maybe done in the office or at a surgery center. The one thing about this type of sedation is it doesn't take you all the way down like anesthesia does. So the patient technically is kind of awake and they can breathe on their own. Some of the agents or drugs that they'll use will be including fentanyl, Versed, and propofol. You'll see propofol used predominantly in the GI lab, and then you'll see Versed and fentanyl used a lot in like the cath lab and IR. Just as observations over the years of the difference, fentanyl really makes people mad. I've seen fentanyl patients actually punch the staff, get kind of like violently out of control. I mean, they have to be further sedated to lose the edge. Versed's fairly agreeable with most people. I mean, I'm kind of surprised someone comes into the cath lab having a heart attack and then they put them on the fentanyl and then they kind of lose it. Not everybody. I mean, this is kind of a once in a while deal, but no, it's interesting on what people are going through and their reaction to the different drugs. Propofol is fairly chill as well. It puts people at a fairly nice sedate level. You never really see anyone losing it, and it's quick acting, so you don't have to have the patient in recovery for a long time with propofol versus like Versed and fentanyl. So then we get up to the next level. There's some more in-betweens between the ones I just showed and getting to this level, but for the sake of keeping it kind of concise. So unconscious sedation, which would be at the anesthesia level, you would use like for the EP lab and in like the hybrid OR rooms. OR surgical cases, I mean, that's where you predominantly would see it used, and then L&D for like C-sections. Three of the most commonly used agents right now for anesthesia are isoflurane, sevoflurane, and desflurane. The advantage with isoflurane is it works better on older folks. It's more agreeable to them. And then also isoflurane would be used for your bigger type surgeries. So like say if you're doing an open heart or like maybe a total back or even any kind of cranial surgeries, you would probably want to go to isoflurane, and you rarely ever see it other than maybe in like the CVOR, or like I said, if you have a big ortho room, you'll see isoflurane, and most machines won't have them on them anymore. Sevoflurane, like I said, came out or was reintroduced back in the late 90s. The one advantage of it is that it's very quick acting, and then it also, you come out of it quickly. So it's ideal for surgery in that, you know, you don't have to have a long recovery time, and it doesn't take long for the patient to go out either. So that's one of the big pluses with sevoflurane. And then desflurane has similar property. It's quick acting, and then it's also come out of it quickly. Sure.
Who decides which? How do they figure out like which one to use?
You know, to be honest, I don't know. Yeah, no, it's I mean, the anesthesiologist would be probably the better choice, but Sevo and Des are like almost on 90% of the machines, so those are your two choices. Like I said, unless you're in like a specialty kind of room, you'll never see isoflurane. You know, because like when I'd be out doing PMs and I'd be looking for an isoflurane vaporizer, they'd be like looking at me like, well, we don't use that. And I said, no, you got it here somewhere. And sure enough, it would be back in some corner on some machine, and you know, like sometimes tucked in the back. So yeah, I mean, you'll have at least 2 or 3 of them in your OR, but like I said, almost everyone else uses Des and Sevo. Sorry, forgot to mute my phone here. Okay, These are some of the agents that, like I said, you'll see around the OR or other clinical areas that use anesthesia. For myself, I guess I'm probably a little biased in my opinion on this, since I basically started out working with vaporizers. But to me, the vaporizer is the heart of the machine. Without a vaporizer, an anesthesia machine is just a fancy patient monitor and ventilator. So to me, it's kind of the, I don't know, machine-centric part of anesthesia. Basically, its one and only purpose is to turn the liquid agent into a gas. So when you pour the agent into the vaporizer, it is a liquid. And then what will happen, at least with the isoflurane and sevoflurane, I've never seen inside a desflurane vaporizer, you'll have a great big wick. And so what will happen is the carrier agent will either be oxygen or nitrous oxide, will come down through the vaporizer, and then the wick is kind of a U shape. So the carrier gas will go past the wick, and it will actually wick the agent off the wick, and then it'll then pass through it and then go back out and then to the patient. How you control the amount of anesthetic gas you get is how far you stick the wick out. So if you want like 2%, go out like this much. If you want, say, 4%, it'll go, and et cetera and et cetera. So that's basically how the anesthetic gas is created. It's through basically evaporation as the oxygen or nitrous flow over the surface of the wick. So here's these look like Tech 7s. They were originally made by Daytech Somita, and then later GE took them over. So here we have the two standard kind of vaporizers for ISO and SIVO. Little interesting story. So I got called up to the OR on a call, and they said, we can really smell a lot of anesthetic gas in here, and you need to get up here now, of course. And so I go into the room, and it was, they were using SIVO. So each of the gas kind of has its own smell if you work around it enough. So you'll be able to identify just by the smell what agent you're dealing with. And I looked around and I checked obvious suspects, which is normally your patient circuit that's going to the patient for its leaks, because those patient circuits can be rather cheap and poorly made. So I checked the usual spots and I couldn't find the leak. And so I was really concerned that I might have a rather major leak going on inside the machine, because everyone in the room was fairly drowsy and unresponsive, and I was, starting to get that way myself. And those of you who worked in the OR, the OR is typically dark other than the OR lights, so it's really not obvious to get a chance to see what's going on. Well, what kind of clued me in is the anesthesiologist slumped over, and I was able to see around him, and the cap on the vaporizer wasn't screwed down. Sorry for my fat fingers here. Speaking of being slumped down, so the cap here was unscrewed, and so the vaporizer was pumping all this anesthetic gas out into the room, I mean, in massive volumes. So luckily I was able to get over there, screw it down, and then what I did is I went to the flow regulators on the wall that had oxygen that weren't being used, and I opened them wide open, and I just kind of hung out to make sure everyone was going to be okay, because I didn't want to turn the machine in the room back over if if they were going to have a problem. So fortunately, everyone kind of came out of their little nap, and then the case went on, and I guess just dumb luck. But yeah, that was a pretty intense anesthesia moment to walk into, because the room was already full of sevoflurane and getting worse. So one thing you can identify too, besides smell, is each of the vaporizers has their own color code. So the ones that we currently use, isoflurane's purple, Sevo's yellow, and then desflurane is blue. One thing to know about desflurane is that it needs to be heated before use. So it does come in a liquid, but it has to be at an operating temperature. And the desflurane vaporizer will not turn on until it's at its operational temperature. So you may get a call saying we can't turn on the desflurane. Well, that means they just turned on the machine. And I don't know, it takes probably 10, 15 minutes for the des to get up to operating temperature, but it won't let you turn on the volume setting on the top of it. So like I said, if you get any kind of issues with des not coming on for you, then it's probably not up at its temperature. And then here's a Daytexamide, and I think Baxter makes these still, Tech 6. And it's got a little different setup as far as the fill. It's got a different kind of bottle and adapter. So the agent bottle actually has a kind of a keyed in on it. So you can't mix ISO with Sevo or desflurane. So they are keyed, and to prevent like you putting the wrong gas in the wrong vaporizer, which would not be a good thing. Some of the things that you might do with the vaporizer during a PM is you want to measure the accuracy. You know, so if you're setting it at 4%, you're going to want to see 4% plus or minus some percentage. And then there's also exclusion system for safety. Most of the vaporizers have their own built-in exclusion system. So what the exclusion system does is if you have more than one vaporizer on the machine, the one that you have turned on will lock out the other vaporizers. So you can't turn on two vaporizers at the same time. So that's one of the things that you'll want to check is during your PM. Some of the older machines you probably won't run into anymore had an external exclusion system. And could have up to like 3 vaporizers on it. So you had to turn on and check each and every vaporizer and make sure the other 2 or 1 wouldn't come on at the same time. Like I said, it's very kind of complicated mechanical type system, but most of them are built in now. So you just, you try and turn the other one on while you have the one you're testing on. If you can't turn it on, then that checks your exclusion. One thing that probably folks at sea level aren't aware of or had to deal with is at altitude, like say in Denver and higher, we actually have to compensate for the increased altitude because anesthesia is less efficient at altitude than it is down at sea level. So like you may have to, like when you're checking it, say at 4%, you may get like 3.4% or 3.5% is your reading. With the gas analyzer, they will give you a chart to tell you both based on altitude and what type of gas you're using, what that compensation is. Then they'll give you a number and then you multiply it by your reading, and then that will adjust for the difference between sea level and up at altitude. So also on the modern anesthesia machines, I don't know if they even make them anymore without a ventilator. It's pretty standard on the machines. So basically what happens is the anesthetic agent basically paralyzes everything but the heart. And so during an anesthesia procedure, the patient has to be intubated, and then has to have assisted breathing through the ventilator during the case. The ventilator also is part of the gas delivery and removal system, so the same circuit that the ventilator is using to deliver air to the patient, that's also where the gas is delivered to the patient and then also pulled out with the exhalation. Most of your ventilators are fairly basic on the machines. It won't be like the type that you use for like therapy or like in the ICU. They used to be just a basic pressure ventilator. Now I think you have the ability to select between either volume or pressure or just volume ventilation. And basically it's just there to keep you going until they're done with the case and you're off the anesthesia. So interesting dynamic with this. So the bellows are the things, and I can show you in a future slide, are basically those things you'll see in the shows if you haven't worked with the anesthesia before, and they're the things you see with all the drama going up and down, and you know, is basically the patient's breathing, letting the anesthesiologist know that they're perfusing well, and gives them a visual aid to have kind of a reinforcement to say, yeah, my patient's okay, they're breathing, and you know, but a anesthesia company came out where they got rid of the bellows. And it really, really upset the anesthesiologist because they were always relying on seeing those bellows going up and down to know that their patient was okay. So as a, I guess, fix for the anesthesiologists being upset about them getting rid of the bellows, they put in electronic bellows, and it was a sound. So the sound would change based on the patient's inhalation exhalation rate. So, you know, normally you're in an OR, it's dark, so you don't necessarily have to see the bellows, but they were rather challenged that they didn't have any bellows. So this company came up with an electronic equivalent that mimicked the patient's breathing, but didn't actually bring back the bellows. So that was a rather challenging time for the anesthesiologists, not having their traditional bellows to look at. They also assist in the ventilation process for the inhaled and exhaled breaths from the patient. So not only do you get an indicator that they're breathing, they actually are in the circuit as part of the breathing process. So here's a picture of the bellows. You know, when they exhale, they go up. When they inhale, they go down, or other way around, sorry. So when they breathe out, then the bellows go up, and then when they breathe in, then the bellows go back down. And like I said, for the most part, it just gives a nice visual indicator for the anesthesiologists while they read their Condé Nast or other magazine in the OR or on their device. Don't know where that came from. Another big part of the breathing circuit is the absorber. So what the absorber is basically soda lime in a canister. Pretty much a big chunk of the machine. If you've worked around anesthesia or been in the OR, you'll probably know what the absorber is. Basically, the job of the absorber is to absorb the exhaled CO2 from the patient. And then in time, as the absorber gets used, it changes color, normally purple, to alert the anesthesia tech when they need to be changed. And then here's a picture of the absorber right here. So right now, this would be a new canister. And so as it's used, and it changes purple, and then when it gets down to the right level, then the anesthesia tech will change it out. Luckily for anesthesia techs now, they're normally in a self-contained unit, so you just pull it out, put a new one in, and you're done. Back in the old days, you used to have to like take the old, scoop the old stuff, kind of almost like cat litter, out of the absorber canister, and then like I said, to me, it reminded me of cat litter. They'd be standing there, you know, filling the absorber back up with the soda lime. I know these modern conveniences that they get to have that we didn't. So a huge part of the circuit, patient circuit, that's kind of ignored or overlooked, especially during troubleshooting, is your scavenger slash waste anesthesia gas, depending on where you work and what they want to call it. So basically what the scavenger does, it's a vacuum circuit that pulls the waste anesthesia, exhaled anesthesia gas, and the CO2 from the patient breathing circuit. The one big thing is that it keeps the waste anesthesia gas from being released in the room, like my little vaporizer problem did. And it's kind of like, I don't know how to best describe it. If the scavenger is disconnected or not working properly, you'll get a plethora of issues that don't necessarily indicate that it's the scavenger or the WAG. You'll be looking at the patient breathing circuit, you'll be looking at the ventilator, you'll be looking at your gas circuit. And a lot of times it's because the scavenger's either been disconnected or something's happened to it where it's not properly pulling the gas out, because it's kind of, you know, kind of a two-way thing. You know, what you put into the patient, you have to eventually take back out. And if you can't take out at the rate that you're putting it in, then that creates a number of issues on the clinical side, as well as what the machine's going to do. So if you're in a situation where you're getting some really bizarre issues with your anesthesia and your ventilator, your scavenger or your WAG may very well be your source of your problem. So patient monitoring. So most anesthesia machines, I would say, made probably in the past, or at least this century, have their own standalone monitor. So like if you have a, say you're a Philips house or a GE house, then you'll probably have that same type of monitor mounted onto your anesthesia cart. Because really the manufacturers kind of moved away from having their own attached or part of the machine monitoring. They'll monitor your basic parameters like your ECG, your respiratory, SpO2, and the ever so critical CO2 readings. So here's a basic setup on your anesthesia cart. So right here's your attached aftermarket, or monitor. So this in this case it's Philips, and it's on a GE machine. So basically this thing can operate independently of the rest of the cart. Now this particular screen here is in relation to the machine itself. So like when you're doing your diagnostics, your maintenance, your self-tests, as well as setting your rate on your ventilator, will all be done from this screen that's actually part of the machine. It'll also tell you what type of gas. So it looks like they're using SIVO, and it'll tell you what percentage the SIVO is on some of the newer machines. Trying to think anything else. Down here you have your patient circuit. I don't know if you can, looks like the absorber's back here. You got your bag. So I mean, that's fairly standard thing off the on the anesthesia machine. I was very upset one time because we also as part of our deal with the customer bought the SIBO flooring when I worked for Abbott, we also would give them a basic service package with it as kind of a thank you before the Stark laws kicked in and banned all that. But Vail is up in the mountains in Colorado, and it was during the winter time, and it was in a blizzard no less. And I got called up Denver's, I don't know, probably about 100 miles from Vail, but it's all like this, it's all uphill. And so they insisted that their machine was down and that they weren't going to be able to do cases and on and on. So my boss insisted that I go up in this blizzard and go take care of this anesthesia problem. So I get up there barely, and like I said, it's snowing sideways and the roads are bad and on, and go into the OR, and they said, yeah, see, the machine's not working. Well, it was this part of the machine which we didn't take care of. So I just drove 100 miles in a blizzard to tell them in person that it's not my problem with their machine. So yeah, they took good care of me that night. I got a nice hotel and got a nice dinner for my unnecessary trip up the mountains. So I know a little sad song there, but yeah. So sometimes when you do get calls, say if you're not trained on anesthesia, you might interrogate them a little closer. Are they talking about this part of the machine or this part of the machine? Because most biomeds can definitely handle this part without knowing anything about this part. Now, CO2 monitoring is a really critical part of the anesthesia machine, and even though it's on the patient monitor, not on the machine itself. So back in the day, when I first got into biomed, we had these things called capnographs. And basically, capnographs were on the anesthesia machines as well as they'd use them up on the floors. And patients that had been on either sedation or on heavy narcotics were then put on a CO2 monitor to keep track of them. And this was normally up on the floor. So this was kind of in the days before we had monitors everywhere. They were just predominantly in the ICU and CCU and the OR. So long story short, the CO2 monitor is actually more precise and more indicative of the patient having a problem than like oxygen monitoring. So you could put them on a SpO2, and the CO2 monitor would alert you that there was a problem before the SpO2 would. And so what happens is the CO2 will crash well before the oxygen readings will. So if the patient's in distress and they're having a hard time breathing, the CO2 readings will indicate to the clinician that there's something bad going on before your SpO2 well. And then here's my lovely daughter with a CO2 module that she was having some issues with. One thing to keep in mind that these have a water trap in them. And so if the water trap gets full, then it won't let the CO2 through. So if you get called on a CO2 module and up in the OR and they're saying, I can't get my CO2 readings, you can either ask them on the phone and say, hey, have you changed the trap on it? And if that doesn't work for you, then call me back, depending on who you're dealing with. But so that in a nutshell is basically your CO2 module. So some of the things also part of the machine that you might run into if you're working on one or get called up one. So the machines all have gas supply lines that normally hook up to the house gas, the stuff that's built into the booms or the walls. They include oxygen, medical air, and nitrous oxide. And they are the preferred or normal source of where you get your incoming gas. It's really rare, and I don't know whether we have issues in Colorado in particular because of our liberal cannabis laws, but they rarely ever have nitrous oxide on the machines. I was explained to me because I got a special on the side class for working in high altitude. that nitrous oxide didn't work really well at altitude, and you would rarely ever see it, which is true. I mean, you'll rarely ever see a nitrous oxide tank or even the nitrous hooked up to the house gas up at altitude. Now, I guess down here closer to sea level, they'll use nitrous oxide more than we do like in Colorado or like places. And so here's some kind of a manifold showing your gas. So here's your nitrous oxide, your medical air, you got your oxygen, and then you have your vacuum, and then this should be your waste anesthesia gas. So it's kind of interesting why that's not hooked up. And then here's where they would plug into. So this being, you know, a boom, and then the wall. And so you have your medical air, you have 2 oxygens, you have your waste anesthesia gas, and then your nitrous oxide. So again, another thing that's optional but probably recommended is that you have backup tanks in case, in the unlikely event that you lose your house gas, then you can turn on the gas on the back of the machine and then continue on with your case. And these include oxygen, medical air, and nitrous oxide. And so down here you'll have a little manifold. So this would be your oxygen, and then you would have a medical air tank back here, and then you could put an auxiliary tank, which would, you know, more likely be your nitrous oxide. And then over here you have your house gas. So they come off of a manifold on the back of the machine, and then you can see the hoses then going either to a boom or to the wall. Waste and vacuum lines. So the purple colored hoses are used for the scavenger waste anesthesia gas removal. The white colored hoses are used for vacuum lines. Now, if you get in a pinch, and not necessarily recommended, you can, with an adapter, use your white vacuum line to get the waste anesthesia gas. Case being, I had a cath lab that they were doing a experimental procedure in. In those days, the cath labs didn't have wag lines in them. So I had to go down to the biomed shop and MacGyver together a vacuum/wag line in order for us to get the waste anesthesia gas out of the cath lab. And then it pulled it through the vacuum lines. Now, I posed a question to one of the maintenance guys and say, where does the vacuum go? I mean, is there like a vent on the roof and it goes out there? And, you know, I kind of alluded to what I was trying to do with it. And they were more or less going like, yeah, it goes somewhere. And I said, well, is it going to be okay if I start running waste anesthesia gas through there, or I'm going to find some maintenance guy passed out somewhere? And they were like, yeah, go for it, Bubba. And so we did it, didn't have any problems. And most of your cath labs, IRs, et cetera, now will have the purple lines put into them, because they do occasionally go in there and do anesthesia cases. So back in those days, that was kind of unheard of, but I thought it was kind of humorous to think this somebody in some room could be really happy with you know, the waste anesthesia gas coming out of the cath lab. But so yeah, that's kind of a thing. Speaking of waste, in all the years, and I went all over the country when I worked for Abbott putting in sevoflurane. And so we would normally take one vaporizer off, normally halothane, to replace it with the Sevo. And so the question was always, what do I do with the waste gas or with the waste agent that's in the vaporizers? And I only had one hospital ever tell me that they had a procedure how to do it. So basically what we do, and I don't know if you guys have these in your facilities, but we had hoppers, and they were kind of like a, for better word, like a sink toilet. So you had a regular sink that you turned on the water, and then you had a big hopper that was like kind of a toilet, and then you dump your stuff in there with the water running, and then you'd flush it. Well, of all the places I went to great big medical centers like Duke and the University of Pennsylvania and places like that, and they were just like, I don't know, guess dump it down the hopper. So I went to this little hospital up in Loveland, Colorado. Couldn't have been more than 100 beds. And I asked them, what do I do with the waste gas? Because I didn't want to violate any policies. And they said, we have a policy to get rid of waste agent out of a vaporizer. And I was like, wow, this is the first time out of hundreds of facilities that I've been to that anyone had a policy on how to deal with it. And so they showed me, and it was out by the helipad. It was in an enclosed cage, and it had a big tank, and you were supposed to pour the old agent down into this tank, and then I don't know somehow magically it got disposed of. Well, you had to have a key to get in the cage, and well, no one could find the key for the cage, and they said, just dump it down the hopper. So just kind of a little more looser way of dealing with your waste anesthesia gas. A lot of times they would ask me if I could put it back in the bottle, and I very cautiously said, please don't reuse this. This is used stuff. Don't try and pour it back into something and reuse it to save money, because it is expensive. So one of those hazards with dealing with both waste gas and waste agent. Another thing, so if you don't have a waste anesthesia gas scavenger circuit available, I would use this as kind of a backup, and this is a charcoal canister. And what you would do is you'd hook your WAG line up to the end of this canister, and then you would vent your waste anesthesia gas into this charcoal canister. Now, this was for like areas that didn't have the ability to handle it. So for testing, it worked great. You know, like, so if you're checking a machine or doing the tests on a PM, this did okay, but I wouldn't recommend using this in a case because even after doing the PM on a machine and dumping all my waste gas into this, they're about like yay big. And it'd get rather stinky, and I could smell the gas just doing my testing on it. I can't imagine them actually using it during a case, but supposedly it can. So kind of an alternative to having a standard waste anesthesia gas outlet. So for the most part, an anesthesia machine has just about everything you would use to test, like a patient monitor and most type of patient equipment. One of the unique things, and you will absolutely kill anyone that comes in and robs your test jigs, because, you know, us being biomeds, we're kind of lazy and resourceful, and, you know, like, oh, wow, that's that outlet connection that I need, and I'll just borrow it. And so then the next 6 months later, you know, you're going to go do your PMs, and your test jigs have been robbed of their unique parts. And like I said, you would test the anesthesia cart with, you know, the same type of stuff, like, you know, your monitoring testing equipment, of course, electrical safety. But like I said, for the particular uniqueness of the anesthesia cart, you'll need a gas analyzer. And the one that I used, not this is any endorsement, was the Rikens. And the Rikens been doing them gas analyzers forever. As a matter of fact, I even used the old-timey ones, if anyone's has worked in anesthesia, that you had to take your reading with the little bulb, and then you looked in the little sight glass, and then you lined up the arrows, and then that would tell you what your output was. Fortunately, most of the time I got to use a little more advanced system that basically tells you what the percentage of gas is in relation to what your setting is on the vaporizer. And then, not to, like I said, favor any brand, I haven't actually used BC Group. I've heard people that have them, they say they work great. They work just as good as a Riken. So there are alternative manufacturers of gas analyzers. Okay, so here's kind of the unsung hero in my book in the anesthesia world is the anesthesia tech. And they're basically the person in the OR that goes and takes care of all the carts. They stock them, they refill the vaporizers. They're probably going to be your first source or indicator that there's a problem going on. In my book, they're worth their weight in gold. So if you have a really good anesthesia tech, I try to do my best to really take good care of them. And chocolate's a good start because they're kind of like an unappreciated, you know, the anesthesiologists really don't take care of them. The nurses don't take care of them. So if you give them any kind of attention, chocolate's a good place to start with them. They will save you gobs of problems. They'll actually try and work on the machine and try and figure out what's going on before they call you. So like I said, by all means, please take good care of your anesthesia tech. And thank you for your time. Any questions? Oh, thank you. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, sure. Yeah, so when I went for my training, we got issued our Rikens in class, and then I got to stay after class, and the instructor then went over how to use it. It's both by altitude and by the type of gas you're using. So there's a compensation factor tied in with it. I think the newer machines are smart enough, they can figure it out. But I always used a chart that way. Then, you know, in here I was thinking correctly because, you know, a lot of times working on machines, you get a little loopy. So if the math wasn't adding up, then I knew I was doing something wrong. But you know that it is a little more advanced than when I was primarily doing it.
Wouldn't it be based on barometric pressure?
Balloon pumps or barometric pressure.
For the anesthesia gas mixture though. Same with like CO2 when you measure CO2 at altitude. It's all off base barometric pressure because the sea level's what
735. Or no, yeah, it is 760, and we're at 735. 630. I don't know, it's been a while since I worked on a balloon pump, so. Sir.
Brian, I got a question.
Sure.
Can you speak briefly to sources of breathing circuit leaks or patient circuit leaks, because there's so many different places you work or bellows? Yeah, most of the time I would see with the patient circuit, it would be right there at your Y, where the hoses go into the Y, or the connection to the intubation tube. It's, I would say, probably 90% of where your leaks are. And then on the other end where they connect into the ventilator, because it seemed to me like those pieces, they either don't quite get them in right, or they'll crack them when they install them. And then that's where you get your leaks. And most of the time the machine will negotiate it. You won't get any like really adverse like reaction to it, but every once in a while they'll get a sizable leak that machine's like, yeah, I've got a leak. Rarely do you ever get an internal leak to the machine itself, unless they put the ventilator back together, or you got a bad O-ring. You'll get leaks from that, but yeah, most of it's just the cheap plastic patient circuit that they buy, and then by that point, hopefully the anesthesia tech's already been in there and changed the circuit out for them. So by the time you get there, it may already be fixed and you're on your way. I think I saw someone this way. Oh.
Can you tell us about the technicians who said that passed away working on the machine?
Yeah, so Danny, he'd been in biomed for, oh, you mean the technicians that passed away? One of them, I don't know, there seemed to be a little mystery on in what it was at a local hospital, matter of fact, one that I actually worked at, that they were found dead in the room. And however, they had found bottles of agent in their pockets. And so there might have been a little extracurricular activity going on there, and they didn't know what they were doing, unfortunately. And then the other one was they had a massive leak in the machine, and it was in the middle of the night. I normally did my anesthesia PMs at night myself, and can't remember what, I think it was the vaporizer had a leak, because back in the day, we used to have to match the vaporizer up to the manifold on the old Draeger 19.1s, and they had little O-rings behind them, and those O-rings like to slip out. And he was doing his PM, and they came in the morning, and unfortunately had been overcome by the anesthesia, and since there was no one checking on them, then it just kept going and going and never, yeah, so do please take caution when you do work with these machines. One thing I do when I work on them is I put the Christmas tree off of it, like an oxygen flow meter, and I stick it in my teeth. And if I can't hold the flow meter end on in my teeth anymore, then I know it's time to leave, and I don't want to even ask. I just close the door and walk out the room. I did have an unfortunate incident. I was down in Phoenix working on some machines, and I had my vaporizer sitting on one of those aircraft carrier surgical tables, and it was full and ready to go. And so the OR tech came in to go clean the room. Well, they hooked the mop on the wheel, and then the vaporizer was, ready to go. Well, I had a bottle of agent. Back in those days, they were made out of glass, and I had it tucked underneath my arm. Well, I do this to catch the vaporizer from falling off, and then my bottle goes flying out. So we had to evacuate the OR. Fortunately, it was the end of the day, and there was only one case going on, and they were wrapping up. So they weren't actually under, and that they were able to roll them out of the OR. But yeah, no, I shut the OR down for like 3 hours, and I felt like that big. So there are risks to it. But yeah, no, the one of the OR techs is like, okay, everyone out of the room, closed the doors, went up to the charge said, okay, everyone out of the OR. And then I went back in with my gas analyzer and verified that it was good to go. But yeah, no, there are some unpleasantries and risks to the business. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you for coming out, and enjoy the rest of your time here at the MD Expo.